Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about Linux careers. But to start off with, I figured we'd talk a little bit about getting Linux and a little bit of getting started stuff during the critical path today. So my first thing to cover is, what distro do you use? So clearly, I have an opinion, right? But that's not shared by everyone. So I would look at a couple of different factors for what distro should you choose. Uh, One is, one second as I turn off my sound on this other computer. One is, what are you going to be using it for? What are the skills you're interested in learning? And I think those, along with some of your kind of constraints, are probably going to give you a pretty good idea of what distributions you should look at. So, for example, for Linux careers, um, a lot of people, a lot of places use Red Hat distributions, which might then, if you're interested in that, or things like certifications, like you might choose the Red Hat path because of all these other things that also interest you. And then in the Red Hat path, you've got things like Fedora, CentOS, RHEL, or potentially other related distributions. It might be that you're going to install on an older machine, which may also have implications for what distros that you can choose. So, kind of thinking about what your constraints are and where you want to go a little bit longer term will help you, I think, pick a distribution. So, the first thing once you've kind of picked your distribution, though, is downloading it and installing it. And I'm not going to go through that today, but I did want to show you some options. So here we're looking at one of my machines, and you can see that I've got the Fedora Workstation 42 page pulled up, and you can download a couple different options. You can download a live ISO, right? So you boot off of this ISO and it loads into memory and you can work with it, but it doesn't actually install anything to your disk unless you tell it to persist that image to your disk. It's a relatively low barrier to get started, just kind of like experimenting with Linux. The downside would be that nothing's ever saved unless you persist it to your disk, in which case you have to give it some disk space to use. We also have Fedora Server. Fedora Server has installation media where you actually do a full and complete install, kind of like we would with other server distributions. One of the nice things about Fedora is that it moves very quickly. It's always got a lot of new and interesting things in it. But the downside is that it moves very quickly and it's got a lot of new and interesting things in it. So we also have CentOS Stream. So CentOS Stream is more closely tied with the longer term life cycle of RHEL. So a new version of CentOS Stream comes out every 3 years, just like a new version of RHEL comes out every 3 years because they're tied together. And CentOS Stream moves a little bit slower than Fedora. CentOS Stream also has a 5-year life cycle. So once the component RHEL distribution goes into maintenance mode, we stop producing updates to CentOS Stream. So Fedora has a 6-month release cadence with an 18-month life cycle. CentOS Stream has a 3-year release cadence with a 5-year life cycle. And then, of course, we've got RHEL. So you could register for a no-cost developer subscription. And once you have one of those, you can go to access.redhat.com, which is the customer portal, and you can log in using your redhat.com account that now has a developer subscription attached to it. And you can download QCOW2 virtualization images or DVD install media or other components as well. A RHEL for individuals developer subscription is free and gives you 16 systems worth of entitlements. So there's for a home user or a smaller user, it is plenty of boxes, but it is limited, unlike CentOS Stream, where you can have as many boxes as you want, or Fedora, where you can have as many boxes as you want. All right, so that's some on distros. Now there's other distros too, like Arch, right, which is a rolling release distro, or Ubuntu, which is a Debian-based distro, which means that it uses some different tools. So for example, in Fedora, CentOS Stream, and RHEL, we use RPMs as our packaging, software packaging technology. And we use a command called DNF to install those packages. Whereas in Ubuntu and Debian, they use a package format called a deb, and they use an application called apt to interact with those packages. And so based off of your distribution, you'll learn different commands and different ways of doing things. We put files in different locations. Sometimes the files are different formats. For example, Ubuntu and Debian for that matter, for their network configuration, they use a INI formatted file, where in the Red Hat land, Fedora, CentOS, and RHEL, we've moved away from configuration files and instead we rely on an application called Network Manager and a backend database where all that stuff is stored. And so there's enough difference between kind of some of the major distributions that if you spend a lot of time and gain a lot of expertise on one, it's annoying to have to move to another. So that's one of the reasons why early on you kind of like pick kind of the realm that you're interested in and you go down that path. All right, so that's a little on picking distributions, and I'm sure there are probably some chat discussions going to be happening on that as well. I'll leave that to the chat folks. But the other thing that you want to think about when choosing a distribution is how are you going to install it? Where are you going to put it? So there are a couple different options there as well. You can see that here on my screen, I'm using VirtualBox. And so this is actually a Mac. And so I use VirtualBox because it is easy to install and manage on a Mac. And then I use that to install my Linux distributions. And I can boot them up and run them as VMs and I can experiment and stuff. But these are experiments, right? I run them to do different things, or I'll boot something up to QA something or check out how it looks in a browser or what have you. I'm typically not using this for everyday use. So I'm not like booting these machines up and using them every day. I end up using the host operating system, I think, for a lot more day-to-day tasks. But it's a great way to kind of experiment and check something out. It's easy to install and delete stuff out of VirtualBox. And there are other virtualization technologies that you can use as well. If you really want to get more bang for your buck, I think, for learning Linux, I would install it on a machine and use it as your primary operating system on that machine. Because then you have to touch it every day and you have to learn how to do stuff like apply updates to it, because that's important to you on your daily use system. Or you may need to install additional things, like maybe you're interested in having a Chrome browser, which doesn't come with your chosen Linux distribution. So you got to figure out how to add a repository and install it and maintain it over time. So I feel like if you use the system every day and you're actually using it for your primary work, you end up learning new and additional skills that will help you longer term. What box are you going to install it on, right? Like, can I install it on a Mac and overwrite my Mac OS? Maybe, but that's also going to introduce some complications. So you might just have, like I do, this older box laying around. So this is an older ThinkPad. It's probably not going to provide a great daily driver experience, but it'd be all right. I actually gave it to my children and they were using it for quite some time. But you can now, like, as a daily driver, you learn a lot and you do stuff. The other thing that you could do with these older boxes, and that's what I'm looking at doing with this box specifically, you could do things like turn it into infrastructure. So for a number of years, I ran a internal DNS and DHCP management all off of a Linux box like this, sitting in a closet. And so it gave me a lot of experience doing DNS records and managing static IP leases and other kind of network infrastructure things. And this was a great form factor for it because it has its own built-in battery backup. The services DNS and DHCP aren't super CPU intensive. So on an older system, especially a much older system, they work great because they're not very intensive services. The other thing you could do is take one of these and make it like a game server, right? So you could make it your Minecraft server for your local area network, and you can invite your friends over and they can see your Minecraft stuff that you're doing. Nate, when we were doing the episode guide, because he's out today doing fun things in the woods, um, Nate suggested a Valheim server, which I don't know the requirements, like the system requirements for Valheim. So you may want to pay attention to that before you decide to go down that route. But for like a Minecraft server, even a box that's 5-7 years old has perfect amount of compute to support that workload. The other thing that you could do is you could decide to install your machine as a dual boot. So as a dual boot, you're basically choosing one operating system or the other to run on the machine. And this is the one that I think is probably a lot of people start as a dual boot or are kind of like interested in dual boots. But the reality is that dual boot, oftentimes you don't commit to, or you commit to one or the other. You don't really commit to both. And so if you're really trying to like start Linux and get into Linux, dual boot is probably the least effective way of doing that, because you're going to rely on the other operating system that's on that machine for a lot of your day-to-day tasks, which means when are you actually booting into and using the other operating system, right? When are you getting that hands-on experience to use it? So I think a lot of people start with dual boot or even get recommended on online and in forums to do dual boots. Personally, what I found is my own behavior is that I end up not using the second operating system because I'm always using the first operating system on that computer. So my recommendation would be a virtual environment, just like I'm showing you here with, and you can actually run multiples. So for example, like this is my Fedora 42 server that I was monkeying with before the show, or here is my RHEL 9 box that I run sometimes to check things out and do stuff with. And so you can have multiples running at the same time using virtualization, which is cool. But you're not daily drivering it, right? You're like booting it up to try something out and do stuff. And then you can use the local hypervisor, web browser, and other things. The other alternative that I would recommend is ExtraBox, right? ExtraBox, even an old one, you can do a lot of stuff with. You can experiment, you can run infrastructure services. The one thing I will say about old boxes is that may limit the distributions you can choose. For example, this one is old enough now that I don't think it'll support RHEL 10 because we've removed CPU support for the CPU that comes in this machine. But it would run RHEL 9 great. And there's still 7 years of RHEL 9 lifecycle left. So you may have some choices like that, or maybe you're like, oh, well, I don't want to run RHEL 10 because I know that my CPU doesn't support it. But Alma Linux, for example, announced that they're going to support a lot of older CPUs for Alma Linux 10. Which is a derivative of CentOS Stream that's binary compatible with RHEL. So you can, based off of what your chosen installation looks like, you can again make like tweaks to what distribution you're interested in. Anyway, so that's a little bit on choosing a distribution. Again, I told you a bunch of Red Hat related ones, but there's others like Arch Ubuntu, SUSE. There's different derivatives within there. So like SUSE has OpenSUSE and Tumbleweed and all different things. Fedora also has a bunch of options too, like Bazzite, which is a bootc-based, image-based version of Fedora that's used for gaming and kind of does Steam compatibility. So yeah, there's a lot of options out there. So think about what you might do with it and how you're going to install it. And I think that'll narrow down from this like huge sea of options to something a little bit more targeted that you can make decisions off of. All right. So when we come back, we're going to talk about some projects that you might consider to help give you some of that experience. And what would you learn by doing these projects? We're also going to talk about some other components of careers in Linux. So things like, what skills should I learn? What advice is there on certifications? When I'm doing things like job interviews, how do I make myself stand out? And maybe we'll even do a couple of job interview tips, because I know a guy that does a lot of interviews. So um, yeah, stay with us after we return from the little transition graphic. Don't forget to mash that like and subscribe. Today is not really a super technical episode, but we're trying something new. So see you in just a few minutes. All right, I said a few minutes. I meant a few seconds. All right, so uh, you've made your decision on your distro that you're going to choose. What are some topics, or what are some projects that you could do to gain experience? So I mentioned that I use a old laptop for things like DHCP and DNS. And so that gives you experience with things like network infrastructure technologies. DNS is not something that a lot of people have a lot of expertise in. Usually there's like one person that manages it all. So you can learn some of these less often used skills. Or a lot of times, like DHCP is handled by network appliances. Um, and so you would have to go through and like configure it on a Linux box, which is a not often used skill, but it gives you a lot of control over your local area network. I think the one that we often recommend is like, oh, run your own website or make your own blog with WordPress. All right, so that's a pretty easy project to get started with. And what you would learn there is like software installation, right? Because you got to install WordPress or you got to install the web server. You also get to learn things like service management. So how do we make sure that it starts at boot time? How do we decide to apply updates to it? What are the frequency at which we need to maintain this thing? And then you can also start to get into like not Linux topics, but other compute topics like how do I make content for my website? What format should I use? Maybe you're interested in CSS. How do I make web graphics? Like, so there's a lot of other technology things that would come about potentially from committing to that project. I mentioned Minecraft, or Nate suggested Valheim server. What are you going to learn if you do that project? Well, one is you'll have a fun little thing that you can play with. I mean, that's cool. But often Minecraft and Valheim are deployed as containers. So if you take on that project, you're going to be learning stuff about containers. You're going to learn things like Podman. You're going to learn how to download, run, maybe set as a service a container, so it starts when the machine starts if you have a reboot or something. You're going to learn things like networking, because you're going to want to offer those game services to other people on your network. You're going to learn things like storage, because you're going to have to store those games. Games can sometimes be very large. So you may run out of space, and you'll have to figure out like how to deal with running out of space, maybe some logical volumey stuff, maybe adding additional storage through disk drive media or something else to the machine, or maybe even moving it as you outgrow the disk of your machine, moving it to actually live on an external storage something, but still connecting the external storage to your local machine. So those are the types of things you'd learn running a gaming server potentially. I know that Nate and I see that JScar is in the chat as well. I'm pretty sure they use Linux for their home media centers. So there you get into things like storage and containers and codecs and additional third-party software that doesn't come with your Linux. So defining new repositories and installing other people's stuff and having to deal with configuring other software on a machine that doesn't come with your Linux distribution natively. And then the third one, or the last one rather, that I'd like to talk about is writing your own software. And I think this is one that probably is the most intimidating to people, because they think about like software development, and that seems like a really big, gnarly, open-ended project. But so I've been talking with my younger son about writing his own games. So he actually does some kind of like graphical or vibe coding at school, and I'm always impressed with the amount of complexity that he puts into his programs. So it's not that he's not able to understand the concepts, but he doesn't choose a language like Python. So if you want to get into something like that, I would say building your own game is actually a really easy way to go. I'm super old. So when I was younger, games were not very attractive. And I think that's also something that I think intimidates a lot of people because they're like, I can't make my game look like, I don't know, Valheim or Minecraft. And that's probably true. But realize that you can make a lot of fun games that don't look super awesome with graphics, right? So one of the original games that we used to play online were MUDs, multi-user domains, and it was all text-based. And so somebody kind of like designed a map. You never even got to see the map, but you could move around, like go left, walk down the hall, like so there were prompts that would allow you to interact with the game and fighting monsters and other things, picking up items. When I was in high school, another guy wrote a game that was like a drag race game. And essentially, it was like two lines on the screen, and there was an at sign that was your car. And it would progress, like the graphics were like the at sign going down the car. And there was another one that was your opponent's car. And so every time you won a race, you earn money. And that money went into your account in the game. And you could use that money for buying upgrades to your car, which would make it go faster down the road. But you could also do things like buy sabotages to play against your opponent. And he used basically dice rolls for making these decisions, right? So before you did your race, you kind of like built your loadout of sabotages you wanted to have or upgrades that you wanted to consume for this specific race. And then every time you did something, like you did an upgrade, you actually activated the upgrade, or you activated the sabotage against your opponent, it would do a dice roll to see whether that was going to be sufficient or have a problem, or how much damage it would do to your opponent, or whatever. Making a random number generator dice roll in Python is super easy. And then choosing what to do based on the number that comes out of it, also a very straightforward thing. So you could start with designing your game and just start with something really, really easy of start with a dice roll and make a decision based off that dice roll. And as you work on it, you'll get more and more complexity. And there you're learning the language, right? You start with a random number generator. You start with a case or an if then else style decision construct where you're deciding what to do based on the result of that dice roll. And as you get further and further, you'll end up learning one, how to write better code, but also how to do other more complex things. Like, oh man, I need to store information. Cool. So now you're like handling variables and maybe doing arrays because you actually want to store a bunch of information that you can reference whenever at different parts of this game. So even simple games can actually be quite fun to play against your friends, especially if you're the author and you can show them how cool it is. All right. So those are some projects that one might do on Linux. And the more I think you touch it every day and you make progress on those projects, the more you will learn, because you're touching it every day and you're having to look up how to do things and you're learning new skills. You're building your command catalog on working on this project. All right. So what skills should you learn? So there's a lot of basic skills that you'll just have to have, like permissions and user management, installing software. So that's just going to naturally come from using Linux every day to do stuff. What skills should I learn beyond that? I think containers are a worthwhile skill to learn. It's widely applicable not only for administering boxes, but packaging software and even writing and managing software. So that's a good skill, I think, to learn. Depending on how widely you want to share your thing that you're working on, a container can be shareable, but maybe you want people to make their own derivatives of it. So maybe a container, maybe you want to give them a base piece of software and they can go and create configuration files and other stuff from there, in which case container file might not be the best packaging. Maybe a deb or an RPM would be a better, more portable packaging to allow someone to have the base and then they can add on what they need. Yeah, so I think start with a project, and all of a sudden you'll start learning because you have to make headway on your project. I see that Josh mentioned Home Assistant as another project. So I know there's a whole bunch of people that have home labs. And home labs are a bigger lift, right? Because you're committing to more equipment, and more equipment means more cost. But things like home automation, smart home stuff, my 3D printing and running that on my Raspberry Pi based Octopi, or Pi-hole, which is a Raspberry Pi that like eliminates ads and other stuff from your media. Like there's a lot of different things that you can get into as you get into like home projects. One thing I will warn you about is when you're doing home projects, realize that it can affect other people in your home. So like I had a really tuned up settings in one of my homes where it's like printers and DHCP leasing and file shares. And then I went out of town and there was a power outage. And all that stuff did not come back on cleanly. And I was troubleshooting via the phone from a city halfway across the globe to get those services back up for the family, because they all kind of relied on it, and not having it was painful. So whenever you take on home projects, realize like, what are you going to do if that home project has a problem and you might not be there to like physically to plug and unplug things or reboot things in the right order. Yeah, and Josh says network downtime and family acceptance is a big deal. Yeah, my one of my friends had a saying that he would grade his projects. He called it the wife acceptance factor. How high of a wife acceptance factor does this project have? Meaning, if there are problems, will they accept it? So that's something to check out. I saw Hank mentioned OpenWRT. OpenWRT is a Linux-based distro that you can put on your home router, and it provides a whole bunch of additional changes that you can apply to your home networks. So you can do things like quality of service for different things. You can do filtering for different types of content. So if you're interested in doing more home networking and control of your home networking, that might be an option to basically take commercial-based Wi-Fi equipment and add on a different operating system with a bunch of management tools to help do more and interesting things with that home networking. All right. So skills, like basic Linux skills, yes. I think once you get into things, you'll figure out that you need other skills too, and that's great. Acquiring those skills is important because as you start to think about you wanting to have a career in Linux, that's what you're going to be asked about when you're going on those job interviews. All right, before we start getting into job interviews and things like that, the like elephant in the room is certifications. So I know on the show we often joke about Manager Scott. The dirty secret is I am Manager Scott. So I do hiring and have worked as a manager at Red Hat in a variety of different departments, and am responsible for that. For a long time, I did training and certification. I worked in that department. And I was not only a content developer there, but I also ended up being a manager there periodically through my time there. So certifications are basically a way that someone like Red Hat can say, yes, this person has attained a base level of skills and capabilities. With Red Hat, certifications are hands-on, right? They're practical exams. So we give you things to do, and then we grade the end state of the machine to see whether you accomplish the task or not, right? So if it's like add a user, we don't ask you, what is the command that you would use to add a user? Instead, we say, add a user to the machine with this name and maybe some other components, like should they have sudo or not? Should they be in a specific group or not? And then at the end of the exam, we check to see whether the user created complies with the request that was a component of the exam. And if so, then great, you know how to do that task, right? Because you demonstrated it. And there are other Linux exams that are practical as well, but I think the Red Hat exams are probably the most recognized in the industry of Linux. That said, like that is us saying, hey, you've achieved this level of demonstrated expertise in this field. So as a hiring manager, if I'm wanting someone that I know can cover a variety of tasks like user management and software installation and maybe containers, I can say, hey, I'm going to look for people that have a Red Hat certified system administrator certification because I know that they've actually performed those tasks and shown that they have expertise at least enough to perform the tasks in order to earn the certification. There are jobs at Red Hat where those certifications are required. And that will be noted in things like the job posting, that it is a required thing. Or it might be for some of our support folks, it may not be required to obtain the job, but it may be required within a certain amount of time after starting the job, in which case they are responsible for obtaining that certification. And if they don't, that can be a problem with their employment later on at Red Hat. Right now, I actually work with Josh, who's in the chat, Nate, who's out in the woods having some fun with his family. And for me, I put in our job postings for jobs that's a nice to have, right? It would be a additional benefit if you came with those certifications. The reality is I look at, do you have Linux skills? I also look at some additional things like, can you create content? Can you do stuff like presentations? Can you explain things well? Because those are the critical skills in the jobs that we do on my team. But if I was in maybe corporate IT, I might be more interested in putting certification requirements so I know that there's a level of technical depth that somebody should have demonstrated by obtaining that certification. We also typically do technical interviews. So during the technical interview, we'll ask you questions about how you would perform a task or something else. For the team that I work on now, that's more to kind of like gauge depth, like how deep can someone go in their knowledge. It's not always a practical, right? We just ask them about their work, or we ask them in a specific scenario how they would do something. I think that also shows their mentality, right? So like if I ask them, we're having a problem, and this is what the problem looks like, what would you do? One, they'll tell me what they do by command, right? I'm going to look at the output of this. I'm going to look for the following things in that output. And so that demonstrates some of their expertise and knowledge. But also we can, if we're troubleshooting something, you can actually see kind of how they approach a problem. Like, do they just jump in and like, oh, I'd make a change to this file? I've actually had people tell me that in interviews, and it's like, but we haven't even determined that that's really the problem yet. Like, there's been no diagnosis. You just jumped in and started changing files. Okay, that's an important thing to understand about someone before they start working here. Yeah. So anyway, back to the topic of certifications. So certifications from a hiring manager perspective, like they may be required because they're part of the job. Some people have certification requirements as part of their contracts, right? So to be to fulfill their contract duties with someone else they work for, they have to have a certain amount of certified people on staff. So if that's the case, they may be interested in making sure that their people have certifications. I use them again as a nice to have. It gives me an indication that someone has performed those tasks and they have a certain base level of expertise on Linux, especially the Red Hat ones. Certifications don't get you a job, right? I never make the hiring decision solely on whether they have a certification or not. A certification, in my opinion, is more likely to get you a better placement in the candidate pool, but not necessarily something that people will make a hiring decision off of. So as you're thinking about certifications, realize that certifications don't get you jobs, but they can change where you sit in the candidate pool for whether hiring managers are more or less interested in talking to you about their job, because it provides this kind of like baseline measurement of skill that this person has demonstrated. Well, that was really long. And I'm just going to quickly look over the comments here. Yeah, so there's a little bit of chit chat about different topics like DNS and DHCP. I see from Granite Penguin. Nice to see you, Granite Penguin. Somebody asks, how can you use certification as a nice to have at a company that sells certifications? Well, not every job requires the same level of technical expertise, right? So, for example, our technical support engineers at Red Hat, we actually do have more stringent certification requirements because we want to be able to tell people, hey, when you call into Red Hat support, you're going to get someone who has demonstrated expertise. And the way that we prove that demonstrated expertise is by then obtaining certifications, right? We know that they have a base level skill set of skills. But like our marketing people, they probably don't need hands-on proven technical expertise with the product, right? Because they're doing things like writing content for a web page, which is not demonstrating their Linux expertise. So that's how I can say that at a company that in their broad portfolio of products includes personnel certification, not every person needs to have a personnel certification. All right, that said, I think half of the guys that work on my team do have a Red Hat certification. Mine has expired, but I periodically think about renewing it. And for we're having someone new join in a couple months, and he's new to the industry. And my plan for one of his development items is to send him to training and take the certification exam. Now, whether he passes the certification exam or not, I'm less concerned about, but I want him to have the experience of attending training and learning new skills. And I want him to have the experience of a hands-on exam so that he can kind of go through that experience. And if he's interested in attaining it, I will pay for a retake. If he comes back and he's like, you know what, it was great, I had the experience, but it's not really my zhuzh, I will likely not insist that he take that that certification again if that's his choice. All right. Cool. And I see Josh also kind of chimed in on that. Who needs a certification? Who doesn't need a certification in chat? How do I make myself stand out? That's a great question to ask. I think that a lot of people get into the computer industry who are not from the computer industry, right? They may have degrees in music or business administration or what have you. But now they're interested in doing computer things. They may not have had a job doing computer things before, but I think that running your own systems, starting up a project and working on it will not only help you gain experience in that. If you're interviewing with someone and you've not come from a technical background, you now have something that you can tell them about a technical topic that you have gained expertise in and learned and been successful at. And so this is one that I have a lot when we're doing things like interviewing with interns. Interns often are still in university. They may have very limited experience in the workforce. And so I ask them about things that they're doing as hobbies or in their coursework. And I ask them about what has been interesting and what's been challenging to kind of see where their interests lie, what they've dug in and learned about, or what they find industry interesting to see if they're a good fit for the types of things that we do. So be prepared to talk about things that maybe are not your job, but are things that you have done with Linux. Oh, I have a Linux machine that I use every day. And I really enjoy it. Well, the follow-up question is, why do you enjoy it? Right. So be able to have those conversations, especially as you're moving into something like an administrative system administrator type role. Again, if you don't have experience, if I've been system administrating my own system, that's experience, even if it's not corporate experience. Things like development, software development, same thing. I'm writing my own application. I've enhanced it over time. These are the things I've learned about it when I've been doing it, right? Those are all technical interview content things that you can bring to the table, even though that's not maybe in your background or not something that you've been paid to work on. I think the recommendation that I often see online is like, oh, it's open source, get involved with the community. That one is harder to do. One, because you can't control a community, you can only control your interactions with that community. And then often, when someone is new to a project, if it's an established project, people probably aren't interested in handing them really impactful, large scale work because they're brand new and they have no idea whether that person is capable of doing that work or not. But if you assign it to them and it doesn't get done, that can have consequences for the project, right? So if you're going to go the route of, I want to be involved in a community project, an open source project, start small, right? I'm going to read the email archives and kind of get familiarization. I'm going to show up places like their Discord or their subreddit, and I'm going to answer questions about the project. I'm going to help people with it by demonstrating expertise. I'm going to participate in testing and QA of the project, and I'll actually provide feedback and bugs. And when they ask me for additional information, I'll be responsive and provide the information the developer working on my bug or my QE highlighted problem is asking me about it. So those are the things those are the behaviors that you can start with when you're interacting with an open source project that will help you gain visibility in the project so that you can then start to transition into more critical roles within that project, right? More responsible roles within that project because you've demonstrated your commitment, your expertise, and your availability. So people are willing to trust you with more stuff. But no one's going to if you're new to a project, they're not going to make you a GitHub committer like first day, right? That's usually things that you need to earn. And it may be that you have to submit PRs, right? Pull requests or merge requests for applying changes, and there will be code reviews and other things. So I think that's the one when I look at Reddit, that's the one people are always saying like, oh, just get into a project. And it's like, that's a lot harder than you think it is. But it can be done and it can be very rewarding. You just have to put in the effort starting at the beginning to kind of gain notoriety and trust within the community. All right. Yeah, I see Hank has some thoughts around open source developers and project developers. And yeah. And Josh said beta testing. Yep. Right. Providing feedback, putting in effort, showing that you're putting in effort, I think goes a long way with open source communities. Joshua Ox suggested Ansible, and I see some statements on things like Terraform and DevOps. So those are collections of skills, right? So if you're interested in Ansible, right? Ansible is an automation technology. So the first question is, what are you automating, right? Like you don't just do Ansible, you use Ansible to accomplish a task and you write automation to perform a thing, right? So you have to think about what is the thing I'm going to solve with this technology? What is the project I'm going to take on with this technology? But yeah, those are great, additional skills that are Linux related that are very in demand in the job marketplace, right? Because being able to automate and being able to be more effective because you can operate at a higher scale is really handy. When I started in system administration back in the olden days, administrators were responsible for administering like 5 or 10 systems because every single one was like lovingly maintained over time. You edited the files, you individually added users to different boxes, you managed the storage individually. That's not how we operate now, right? In cloud world, you spin up boxes whenever, you shut them down whenever, and you need to be able to have practices and procedures for supporting that type of workload. Now, system administrators administer hundreds or thousands of systems at a time. Well, if you're operating at that scale, you need to apply changes at the hundreds or thousands of systems scale. And you need to have the same amount of administrator work effort. And then the outcome is that work effort gets pushed across all of these larger groups of machines. And that's where stuff like Ansible comes in real handy. All right. So some interview tips. Okay. So I interview every time we have a job opening. I do a fair amount of interviews. A couple of pet peeves for job interviews. I routinely ask questions to people in their job interviews. I know this is shocking, but I often know the answer to the question I am asking, right? Because the reason I'm asking the question is to gauge the interviewee's capabilities. So if I ask them a question and I know the answer I should expect and they provide a different answer, that may mean that they don't have the expertise that I'm looking for. So my number one pet peeve with interviews is don't make things up. If you don't know, just say you don't know. It's fine. Not everyone has to know everything. And what you might do is if you don't know, I don't know, but I could look it up. And this is how I would go about finding that answer. That's a great answer to that question because it demonstrates that, one, you don't know everything, and that's okay because oftentimes you don't have to know everything. But it also demonstrates that you're willing to do research, and you even told me how you would perform the research. So even though you didn't know the answer to the question, you told me how you could obtain that information, and I can then judge whether that's the like realistic way to obtain the information or not. Like, I don't know, but I would use Google to search the following terms and review the answers, or I would use man-k with this term to find the commands that would allow me to do that thing. And I'd have to review the man pages that came back from man-k to figure out which command I really needed to pay attention to, right? Those are all valid approaches to gaining that information. So yes, employers hire people on their expertise, but we all have lived different lives and we all have different knowledge that we've accumulated over those lives. So it's okay to not know everything. If you're making answers up and telling me wrong answers, how do I know that you wouldn't do that in the job, right? If I ask you how to add a user to a machine and you say RPM install, does that mean that if I sent you a task and asked you to add a user, you would do RPM installs? That would mess up my machines. I'm not interested in that, right? But so don't make up answers. That's my pet peeve. I often ask people to tell me about times where things didn't work out well for them. And it's not to like try and hold them responsible for something that didn't work out well. We are humans. And in all human endeavors, mistakes are to be expected. It happens. But what I'm interested in knowing is not that a mistake happened, but how you reacted to that mistake, right? The mistake happened, and I realized that our procedures were flawed. And so I went through and I changed our management policies to say when we did this task, we did it this way now. And that would make it so we would not repeat the mistake in the future. Or I made a mistake. I realized it was because I didn't have enough information about that topic. And so I went out and I took an online training course, or I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, or I did a bunch of research to further enhance my understanding of this topic so that I could make better decisions the next time this situation occurred, right? That's the kind of stuff that I often am looking for when I ask someone about when things didn't work out well for them and what they would do differently now that they had had that experience, right? So they can reflect on like how they could improve and avoid that problem in the future. Um, yeah, my other interview tip I think I gave you already, which was even though you may not have paid experience in the job or in the task that the person is asking you about, if you have done that task or had experience in that topic through your hobby, through your home lab, through working with an open source project, bring that in, right? Because that's like, I have done these things, just not for my employer, right? But I can do them for you because I've learned how to do them through these other things. And so, especially if you're early in your career, you don't have a lot of work experience, so you can't rely on work experience. You have to rely on some of these other experiences that you may have accumulated. One of my interns a couple years ago, one of the reasons why we were really keen to hire him, and he worked out great, was he stood up a game server for the game that he and his friends were playing on CentOS Linux. And so, because he had CentOS Linux experience for this game server that he was playing with his friends, we could talk to him about his Linux experience. Right? He was an aerospace engineering student, so like his university degree was not giving him the experience that we would find interesting in our internship, but his hobby experience did. And he was, not only did he come on board with us, but he was a fantastic intern, and we really enjoyed having him. So yeah, like don't ignore the experiences you might have had just experimenting or playing with something or learning about something, because learning things is important in the industry. All right. So I've talked a lot about stuff. Shantanu asks, how much of the HashiCorp tools questions have made it into the Red Hat certifications? As far as I know, they have not, because Red Hat certifications are on Red Hat products. So Red Hat Certified System Administrator is on RHEL, right? Because that's the product that it's the certification for. The EX300 is on automation. And so it covers things like shell scripting, which can be used to automate tasks, or Ansible, which is used to automate tasks. The others, there's a one on containers, which talks about making containers and interacting with containers. And so there's a lot of like Podman and Builda and that type of stuff on that one. Every Red Hat certification exam actually has a objectives page. In fact, let me go over here. I'll show you what it looks like. Oh, did I stop sharing my screen? Oh, no. All right. So if we go to RHCSA exam, so on every exam page, right, there's this objectives tab. And this very clearly tells you what is covered on this exam, right? These are the things that you should be expected to know. Creating simple shell scripts, booting the machine, configuring local storage, right? So if we go to another exam, one second. So this is the certified specialist in containers. And so if you go to the objectives tab, right, it's telling you, here are the skills that you should have to find success on this exam. So managing images and registries, running containers using Podman, running multi-application containers with Podman, troubleshooting application containers. So every certification will have this. If there's specific technologies that are used, like the one I showed you for RHCSA said shell scripting, telling you the technology. So I haven't seen any that say things like Terraform or Vault, but if those were tested, they would be listed on the objectives guide for that exam. So that would be my answer to you, Shantanu, which is look at the exam objectives. Granite Penguin asks, could you use Foreman instead of Satellite? I mean, maybe. So Red Hat exams are end state tested, meaning we tell you what we want to have happen. And then we test to see whether that's the thing. So if, let's say the requirement is adding a user, you could use user add. That's probably what I would do to add a user to the machine. But you could alternatively edit the etc password file and edit the etc shadow file and create a password and copy and paste it into things and make dir their home directory and chown it to make sure it's owned by that user account. Like you could do all that stuff too and get to the same end result of adding a user to the system. So I once joked at one point there was an exam where we had to configure a mail server. And it's like, you could install Postfix and configure it. That's what I would do. Or you could write a mail server in Perl from scratch. That would also potentially meet the exam objective, but would take a lot longer and be a lot more difficult. So probably not worth spending your time on. So if you're showing up to the satellite exam, I would do satellite things. I wouldn't like hark around with individual Hammer database commands or individual Foreman things. Like use the satellite user interface to do the things, because that's what the exam is kind of designed on you doing, right? Is they're asking you questions for satellite configuration, and the mechanism that is provided for satellite configuration largely is the web UI. That's what I would do. I actually had a friend who a long time ago, we had a exam for Red Hat virtualization. And he did all of the configuration of the exam stuff using overt commands, and then was unhappy when he got his exam score back because he did not pass. And it's like, well, but if you do it through the graphical administration, there's other things that occur, right? So like when you create a machine, it doesn't just create the machine, it also creates a whole bunch of metadata, and it stores the machine on logical volume devices, which means it creates logical volume devices. And so if you're doing everything direct, are those the same behaviors that are happening? And the answer was no. So he did not do very well because he didn't fully implement all the things that the exam was looking for things that were configured on the machine. All right. Cool. So I think that's a lot about career stuff for Linux, right? Run it as your daily driver, or touch it every day to gain your skills in command line or application stuff. Do projects that are interesting to you, because it turns out those projects will introduce you to even more things that are going to be potentially interesting. But anything you can learn, anything that you can gain expertise on, may be applicable as you move into other areas. If you're interested in a specific role, like you want to be a software developer, write software. Like that's how you get that experience. But it doesn't have to be contribute to a open source project. It doesn't necessarily have to be write some incredibly complex thing, right? You can start small and grow. And that's, I think, the most important thing as you're kind of developing yourself and in your career. One of the things that I love about working at Red Hat is that there's always more than enough work to do. So what I found is that no one complains when you do the work, even if it's not necessarily work that would normally be assigned to your role. So, for example, my team manages the RHEL YouTube channel. And other people, like technical support engineers, have started to produce videos on different things. Like there was one added just the other week on using SSH with RHEL 6, because it turns out that later versions of RHEL, we no longer support older cryptography ciphers. So what do you need to do to address that? So the technical support engineers made this video and posted it, right? I'm not complaining that they did that work. Great. If a customer needs it, awesome. And now we have a video on it. Awesome. So not every company works like that, I know, but oftentimes, like if you have an idea and you have the ability to do the work, you may have to ask someone if you can do the work, because you don't want to be spending all your time on things that are not your actual job. But generally, if you're willing to do a little bit extra to gain something for yourself or for the company, you're probably not going to get a lot of resistance. So yeah, just growth mindset, right? Keep getting better. Even if the more you learn, the better you get, and the more options you'll have down in life. All right. So that's where we're going to end for today, because man, that was a long episode. What we are going to do next week, Nate will be back. Yay, Nate will be back. And we're going to talk about image mode, right? Which is a new method of building and maintaining Linux systems. It's based off of a technology called bootc, which you will also find in things like Fedora and CentOS Stream, as well as it builds your system using a RPM OS tree is kind of like how it gets packaged and maintained to make it mostly immutable. So we will see image mode next week on Into the Terminal, and I hope to see you then. Thanks for all the great discussion, guys. If you're a deferred viewer, don't forget to mash that like and subscribe, and also take a look at some of these chats, man. They were great advice from practitioners. All right, until next week, everyone. Have a great week.